Who am I?
Richard Casimir, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Casimir in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Casimir. How do we find you?
I'm perfect. Thank you for asking.
Perfect. That's what we like to hear. Of course, it's your summertime, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Are you suffering the summertime blues, though?
No, not really. It's been extremely hot this summer, but it's been a good summer overall. Everything's been fine.
I was going to say, isn't it ironic, because you had an extremely cold winter, if I recall?
Living in New England, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute.
Is that right?
That's the saying.
I was going to say, it sounds a bit like Melbourne weather.
Well, I hope to find out.
Hey, listen, one of the things I thought we'd talk about this week, we're sort of moving into what's called our show season, and they're basically agricultural shows. In Australia, of course, the Perth Royal Show, what we have here. In Melbourne, it's called the Royal Melbourne Show. The Sydney Royal Easter Show in Sydney, which of course obviously has something to do with the time of year. The Royal Launceston Show, the Royal Canberra Show. There's even the Royal Geelong Show, the Royal Hobart Show, and the Royal Adelaide Show. Queensland do things different. It's something that's fairly well known. It's called the Ekka. And they're basically the showcase agricultural type shows where the city meets the country and the country meets the city. Basically, city people get to see all sorts of different things that people do in the country and all sorts of different produce related to agricultural industries, etc. But as time's gone on over the years, there's been a fair amount of criticism for some people saying these things have become too commercial and they've started to drift away from their original intention. I understand in the United States, yours are called county fairs. Are they still as common and as popular as they once used to be?
Yes, indeed they are. You know, when you emailed me that today's topic was going to be county fairs, my excitement level shot up to equal that of my recently diagnosed skyrocketing cholesterol. Just thinking about the greasy, artery-clogging cuisine known as fair food. And fairs, county fairs, state fairs, they are still very popular here, especially here in New England, where America actually got its start. State, county, and agricultural fairs date back to the early 1800s here in New England. Here in Massachusetts alone, the Topsfield Fair claims to be one of the oldest agricultural fairs, and that started in 1818 by the Essex Agricultural Society. And their motto was to promote and improve the agricultural interests of farmers and others in Essex County. So even back almost 200 years ago, people were concerned about preserving and recognizing the importance of sustainable farming. The way your season is set up, you're actually getting into what would be the birthing season of your animals, because you're coming out of winter, so now everything would be birthing, the lambs and the cattle.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, spring.
We have our fairs generally from the end of July through October, which is our growing and harvesting season. So it's just the opposite, but they do basically the same thing. The fairs can run from a weekend. Some of them run up to 2 weeks long. The admission prices are all kept at affordable levels for families. You can get children, senior, military discounts. Depending on the size of the fair, the general admission is anywhere from $10 for weekday tickets to $12 to $20 for weekend passes, plus the parking. There's multi-day passes. You can get amusement ride tickets. A lot of these fairs now are having some big name artists, predominantly country artists, but you're going to see some major pop artists. And those tickets are sold separately, and those are like anywhere from $30 to $100 a piece. Now, if you're charging $100, you're going to be having some pretty substantial numbers coming through the gate. And what I've seen in my lifetime is that these fairs have really consolidated and have gone the extra mile to market themselves properly, to provide the proper balance of agricultural importance and entertainment value. So I don't see any shortage. As a matter of fact, I'm seeing a growth, especially from the waning days back in the 70s and 80s, where it became more of a carnival or like a glitzy, more rides-oriented amusement and less agricultural, because the agricultural end of it fell out of fashion. But now with sustainable agriculture and alternative energy being so important, that's what these fairs are now featuring more and more. And so you're seeing larger crowds going in there specifically to see these exhibitors who are doing traditional agriculture and now modern ways of solar heating, energy efficient homes, log homes, wood burning stoves. There's a lot going on here, and they don't see any end in sight.
And it's amazing when you stop and think about it, because what you're painting is a very positive picture, which kind of makes you think that if ever there are criticisms, and I know from time to time we've had people criticise what's happening, the way the Royal Show's been conducted here, but they still get extremely good numbers numbers, which means that regardless of what anyone thinks, what's there is attracting people. I guess it's fair to say that that's always been the case, but the key is to have new attractions every year. That's something that they do here. I would imagine the same thing is applied there. And once again, we seem to be getting back to the old adage that they do seem to be connecting with the community in the way that they were always intended to connect.
Oh, absolutely. And a good point is that a lot of these rural areas are now have become more suburban, so there's less farmland where these fairs were usually held. And now they're suburban communities, so all the people who are living out in what used to be farmland have a shorter distance to go to these fairs, which is not a good thing for the decreasing farmland availability in order to feed more people, but at least it's bringing to the forefront the importance of sustainable agriculture and sustainable forestry and farmland, and how important that is to keep our areas as pristine as possible, and to hopefully at some point that we can, from an ecological standpoint, instead of always building another strip mall, that how about replanting an area that has been vacant, and how about turning it into farmland? These fairs are also very competitive. Fortunately, they're not always held at the same time. It's very rare that you would see two fairs within driving distance of each other at the same time. So I think there's kind of an honor code where they split up their dates so that everyone can go to these fairs during these July through October months. They're very successful fairs, as I mentioned, the Topsfield Fair, and then there's another one here in Massachusetts in Springfield called the Eastern States Exhibition, or the Big E. Now, what they do is they feature exhibitors from 6 New England states, so that is a huge deal. And what they've done is they've laid this out so that it's just perfect. If you can just wander through this thing for hours or for days and not see the same exhibit twice. Everything is very user-friendly, but also very informative. And I go to probably 3 fairs each year, and I'm seeing more of a conscious effort in providing the visitor with not just the glitz, but also the intelligence and the importance. And I'm seeing more and more conscientious exhibitors who are doing things for the environment, and not necessarily just to sell a product or to sell that wonderful fair food. It does seem to be working.
In the United States, what of these county fairs, the equivalent to our royal shows, what have they done to reinvent themselves and keep themselves relevant? I mean, you've talked about the fact that people have, perhaps to a large extent, moved away from some of the froth and bubble and the flares that go with these shows, and moved on to some of the other issues like the exhibits, and actually having a look at some of the things that really form the undercurrent of these shows. But what other things have they done that have been basically reinventing themselves?
When I was a kid, back in the 50s and the 60s, and even a little bit before that, the county fair looked like someone had just dipped a ladle in a bucket and dumped everything in this one area. So you would be walking around and you'd see the carnival barkers hawking their shooting galleries, and then you'd see a pavilion of baked pies across from that. So everything was a mishmash. So gone are the days of the adults-only hoochie-coochie shows, the human and animal oddities, no more bearded ladies and two-headed calves, unless, of course, you bring them in with you, like in the case of my family. Today you'll find everything from organic farming to holistic lifestyle, alternative energy, beekeeping, quilting, woodworking, tool sharpening, even horseshoeing. This is all separate from the carnival side. What they do is they subcontract out the carnival. Those are now set way off in the background of these fairs. So even if you come through the main gate, you have to specifically walk all the way across from the pavilions to get to the carnival side. This is primarily for safety reasons and convenience, as well as to adhere to the parole restrictions of most of the carnival workers. A lot of these fairs are like trade shows, so you're going to see the latest in farming equipment. Biofuel tractors is not unlikely to see there. How to make your home more energy efficient. The latest solar panel technology. It's all there. And in addition, you've got some of the traditional pavilions like the vegetables and livestock, the arts and crafts, talent shows, a lot of kids shows, clogging, line dancing. And every major fair, there's a pavilion that has nothing but the as seen on TV pitch people. They're selling all the items from the ShamWow towels to those extension ladders and everything that you thought you couldn't live without, but then have to live without because they usually break as soon as you get home. They also have draft horse oxen pulling, the same demonstrations that have been going on for 200 years, major horseback competitions, tractor pulls, and you can still even see trick shooting and bullwhip demonstrations if they have them available.
That's amazing, because something I've got from that, when you said that all these things used to be mixed together, but that somewhere along the line somebody decided that little things had to be separated, like, for example, the carnival had to be separated from other parts of the show. I can't help but think that that might be something that you actually stole from We here in the Antipodes, because certainly to my knowledge, the Royal Show here in Perth, it's always been like that, where all the different things have been neatly set out so you know which area to go to if you want to look at certain displays, or you want to see certain demonstrations, or you want to see people flogging their wares, whatever the case may be. You know where to go.
That's a good possibility. Good ideas go both ways. I would not be surprised if it came from you at all. We don't have the meat pies yet, though, so that's something anybody with the entrepreneurial spirit should actually set up a booth with Aussie meat pies.
There's an idea. Actually, that would be a wonderful idea to do that. Roughly, just give us an idea, and I mean, I know that we'd only be talking ballpark. How many of these shows still exist?
Every state has a show, at least one show. Some states have multiple shows. I think Massachusetts may have 6 shows a year. Some states only have one. On an average, you may have 2 or 3 shows in every state, except for Hawaii. Hawaii did not have an agricultural fair, and I think it's because every day is a multicultural celebration in Hawaii. But every state here, Alaska and all the contiguous lower 48, have at least one fair every year.
I noticed that our Royal Agricultural Society here in West Australia, I think it was established in 1831, and it's held the annual show, which is always held at the Claremont Showgrounds since 1894. So it's been at the same venue for an awful long time. The show, of course, is an icon in West Australia, and at the time it was set up, and I don't think this has changed. The primary purpose of the show was to showcase West Australian industry, primarily agriculture, and it's been the venue for display of new animal breeds and sports. And that theme, that core theme, has always remained, despite the passage of time. Has that been the case in the United States?
Yes, it has. You kind of now have to look for it. If you're going into these shows, traditionally you're going in and you've been to these shows year after year, you know where to go, because what they've done here as well, like the carnival rides, is that they've put all the livestock pavilions and exhibits in one area. You'll see the food, vegetable growing and things like that in another area, and then you'll see the arts and crafts in another area. That's the primary focus, and that's almost like the hub of each fair, is all of those traditional attractions are right there in the center, and all the modern things have kind of grown up around it. I think it has a lot to do with the placement, because in order to make money at these fairs, to cover the cost, is that the fair owners and the fair organizers will charge money and solicit for people to come in and set up a booth to pitch their product. A couple of years ago, I actually worked for Ocean Spray Juices, which is out of Massachusetts, and they were pitching a new cranberry juice. I was hired to be a demonstrator, and next to us was somebody who was selling skin cream, and then somebody next to them was selling deep-fried turkey legs. So, which is a primary fair food. I don't know how it started, but deep-fried turkey legs is a mainstay of fair food. But as I say, those booths are all around the fair. They're pretty benign. The products are good. They're wholesome. You'll have people there exhibiting new types of liquor. You can get like shots of vodka. And what they do is a vodka company like Smirnoff will show up with a new flavor of vodka. But what they've done is they have the non-alcoholic version of it.
Non-alcoholic vodka?
Yes, what's the point?
That's like having no octane petrol, isn't it?
Yeah. The national vendors and the national distributors are there, and everybody has a good time. If we can get onto the food, because I'm hungry, actually.
Why is it whenever I'm on the wireless, everyone wants to talk about food when I can't access any? Oh, go on. Everyone else does it. You might as well knock yourself out. Go on.
Well, traditionally, what we have here is sausages, Italian sausages with onions and green peppers, fried dough. Do you guys have fried dough down there?
We probably call it something different, but basically, if you're talking about the fact that there's cholesterol by the bucketful at these shows, we already know that. If you're over about 35, everyone knows after you've been to the show, you have to have your cardiologist on standby.
Don't hold a match next to your clothes, because the trans fat grease that's on there, you'd light up like a wick.
Mind you, I must say, something that I have noticed over the past few years at the Royal Shows, despite the fact that there is still the usual proliferation of the sort of food that we describe, the healthy alternative foods find their way there, and also other traditional things, like, for example, and I guess at an agricultural show this becomes quite appropriate, things like the lamb van and all the different ways you can have lamb done. Now, I've got to tell you, mate, talk about delicious. That takes delicious to the next level. And something else that they had last year, which was absolutely fascinating was all the aquaculture students from Fremantle Tech and all the different fish that they'd grown. And I'll tell you, mate, there was several fish there. I was thinking, if only I could get my hands on you, there would be fillets to be had.
Because we're in New England and we're a big fishing community.
Yes.
The fish that we see are mostly fried clams, our version of fish and chips, fried haddock and hake. Now we're seeing more sushi. We're seeing more Asian, Indian, Thai food. It's just wonderful food. I can't wait. Although my wife is just going to say, no, absolutely not. Eat an apple. You're not eating any of the fried food. Again, my cholesterol is way out of whack. So I'm still going to eat it, and I'll just do it in the name of research.
Don't you go blaming your heart attacks on me, son. Now listen, just to wrap up, Richard, I notice in terms of the Royal Agricultural Show here, Perth Royal Show, initially it was funded entirely by the Royal Agricultural Society, which I guess would mean by the subscriptions that members of the society had made. I suppose now the society obviously still does some funding. I certainly know the state government kicks in for it. Of course, we have the entry fees that they charge to get into the show, and that's obviously going to raise a fair amount of money. And then the people who have their displays obviously pay to have their displays. And there's also a fair amount of corporate sponsorship for the show. Is that pretty well how county fairs run in the US?
Yes, and they have become corporations in themselves. I'll refer back to the Eastern States exhibition and the Topsfield Fair, where these started out as the agricultural societies, and then they kept using the farmland that they may have leased or it may have belonged to one of the society members. And year after year, these things got bigger and bigger, and the savvy business person said, you know what, we should incorporate ourselves if we want to stay in business. And those people who have done that have been very successful at doing this have really expanded. The other ones haven't. The ones that are doing well and the ones that have been around since the 1800s are huge, and they're like corporations in themselves, which is very good because what that does is it dictates quality. You know you're going to get your buck's worth when you walk through that gate. And I see younger people all the time going in there, especially teenagers, and what it's equivalent to is like a day at the mall, only with manure. They seem to really like it, so everyone has a great time.
Actually, I've got to say a day with manure at an agricultural show sure as hell beats a day at the mall. Richard, as always, it has been a great pleasure to talk to you. By the way, if you'd like to get to know Richard a bit better, if you'd like to be his friend on Facebook, Richard S. Casimir is where you'll find him on Facebook. Casimir, by the way, is spelled K-A-Z-I-M-E-R, Richard S. Casimir. In the meantime, my friend, I'd like to wish you a bucket of chips, a dozen Pluto pups, and a couple of corn dogs.
All right, brother.